Great to be with you. Great to see you. And kind of a start to the new year you've had. But I think in terms of church life, it's been a great start to this new year. Indeed, a great start to this new decade. So I'm just thinking back to the week of prayer that we had a couple of weeks ago. Powerful, powerful week. I just want to say thank you to all of those who came out and prayed, who prayed at home, who came to the evenings. What a great time. There's been so much going on. We've had our small group celebration and sign-ups. We've had our Azalea Sunday, the interview with Ruth Robb. That was really powerful as well. Is this okay? Hang on a minute. Is that stopped now? Okay, I'll use it if it carries on. And of course, last week we had our 10 talks, and that was just fantastic. I mean, I got to see all 9 of those talks, and just brilliant. God speaking through all of those talks, all those different people. Loads going on, but of course, the flip side to all of that is, of course, that life can then feel like it's moving along at quite a pace. I'm sure you can identify. It can feel a bit frenetic. It can feel pretty relentless. So let's just do something together. Just take a breath in, and then breathe out. Feels better already. Take another breath in, and then breathe out, and then keep breathing out. Keep breathing out. Don't do this if you have respiratory problems. Keep breathing out. Keep breathing out. Don't breathe in. Keep breathing out. Keep breathing out. And life can sometimes feel, breathe normally, please. Life can sometimes feel a bit like that at times, or maybe even all the time. Just breathing out, breathless, exhausting, wearying, disorientating. Got to go to work or got to go to school, breathing out. You got to do stuff with the kids, breathing out. You got to keep the house clean, tidy, breathe out. Cook the dinner, breathing out. You got to catch up with a friend, breathing out. You got to catch up on the work that you didn't manage to get done during the day, but you've got a deadline to meet. You're breathing out. You got to catch up on the latest hilarious posts on Facebook or Instagram, and you've got to post something about your own life that makes your life look extraordinary and fantastic, to be the envy of everyone, breathing out. And then on top of all of that, you've got to serve in the church. You've got to turn up early to open up, or turn up early to get into King's Kids, breathing out, breathing out, breathing out. Maybe something is wrong if that's how life feels. It is a basic fact of life that we have to breathe in order to be able to breathe out. It's a fundamental rhythm of life that keeps you alive. You know, when a mother gives birth to a baby, the first thing you're listening out for is the baby's cry, the sign of life, the sign that all is well. But the baby can only cry because first it's taking its first breath in. You need to breathe in order to be able to breathe out. And with all the activity and the pace of life, the breathing in part often gets missed. Rest. The importance of rest, it often gets missed, and yet it is absolutely essential, and it should be a non-negotiable in our lives to have a rhythm of rest in your life. Now, I appreciate, of course, that we go through different seasons of life where that's more difficult than other times. But it started to really bug me about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, when I realized that my response to the question, how are things going? How are you? How's work? My response to that question was the same as the rest of the world. I'm tired. I'm just so busy. I've just got so much on. It's like a whirlwind. And that started to really bug me. I thought, that's not right. Because what I'm communicating there is a sense of burden and a sense of weariness. But actually, I thought it should be different in the church. It should be different, and it should be different for those who follow Christ. Not that I shouldn't be busy, not that I shouldn't have lots to do. That's fine. It's fine to have lots of things on, but actually that I should be thriving in that and not getting wearied and stressed by it. And of course, I was conscious that I was going to be taking on leadership of the church. Responsibility increasing, the spiritual battle intensifying. I needed a different approach, and I needed to take rest and replenishment in all its forms much, much more seriously. And I certainly haven't cracked this yet. I'm still very much learning all the time on a journey, but I would say, my wife might disagree, but I would say that I think I'm in much better shape now than I was a couple of years ago. Even with the increased responsibility that I'm carrying now. And so some of what I say today comes out of that journey. And then there are other things that I'll say that I'm still very much learning and working on as I go along. But we've been doing a lot of work recently as a staff team on the value of working from a place of rest. We've been coming back to it again and again and again. The value of working from a place of rest, as opposed to working until you collapse because you need a rest. That's a very different thing. Work from a place of rest. And of course, there are loads of basic practical things that you can do. Look at how much you sleep, your diet, your physical health, your time management. There are various batteries that we look at. How full are they? How empty are they? What recharges us? There are loads of those kind of things that you can do, but actually I think there's a lot more to it than that. I think it's possible to be busy without being weary. I think it's possible to be busy and to still be genuinely rested along the way. Now, obviously there are limits. We all have different capacities, and it may genuinely be that you are just cramming too much into your life. Some of it enforced, some of it you have no choice about, and some of it not enforced. So there might just be some things that you need to stop doing. The things in your life that are not actually that important, but that take up time and energy. The things that don't actually bear any fruit, but take up stress and energy levels. But the issue for you might not simply be that you're busy. It might be that you're being busy with the wrong things or with the wrong motivations. So here's what Jesus says, one of many things that Jesus says on this. Very familiar passage in Matthew 11 from verse 28. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Come to me, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. There's lots in this. But first thing I notice is that Jesus does acknowledge that we do get weary. It is part of life. You do get weary. He knows it. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. He's not talking about physical weariness here. You know, we can all get physically weary if we miss a night's sleep, we don't sleep well, whatever. Lots of things can go wrong with our sort of physical state and our physical health. We can get ill. But he's not talking about physical weariness, because he contrasts it with finding rest for your soul. And so he's talking about a soul weariness, a spiritual weariness, a spiritual restlessness, and a burden. So in the New Testament context, the words burden and yoke would have had immediate connotations with the law, the Old Testament law. The Pharisees would speak about people being called to carry the yoke of the Torah, the heavy burden of the Old Testament Jewish law with all its various commandments. And Jesus spoke in Matthew 23 about the teachers of the law putting heavy burdens on people's shoulders, the heavy burden of the law. Something that try as you might, you will never live up to. You will never attain, you will never achieve. And while we are no longer under the burden of the law in the same sense, now that we're this side of the cross, I think there is still that same restlessness that exists in all of us that leads to weariness, because actually we're still trying to prove ourselves in various ways. Because deep down, I think we know that actually we were made for a different kind of life. We were made for a different kind of world. We were made in the beginning for perfection. And we know very well we're not perfect because of sin. And so there is a turmoil in all of us. There is a restlessness that goes on in each of us, because we're reaching for something that we can't actually reach. We're reaching for something that is perfect, that we can't achieve. We're reaching for something that is never satisfied. And that, of course, manifests itself in different ways in different people. It's kind of obvious in perfectionists and workaholics. But I think it's there under the surface in all of us in various ways. We are finite creatures who wrestle with infinite desires that we cannot satisfy, which is why Jesus says, come to me. Come to me. Come to Jesus. Come to the infinite one. Come to the eternal one, where you can truly find satisfaction and rest for your soul and for your infinite and eternal desires. The early church father Augustine said, you have made us for yourself, O Lord. And our heart is restless until it finds its rest in you. So we have to take our deepest desires and submit them to God and put them under God in the pecking order, and actually find your primary desire in God himself. So Dallas Willard puts it like this. He says, desire is infinite, partly because we were made by God, made for God, made to need God, and made to run on God. We can only be satisfied by the one who is infinite, eternal, and able to supply all our needs. We are only at home in God. And when we fall away from God, when we take our eyes off him, when we turn the other way, the desire for the infinite remains, but it is displaced upon things that will certainly lead to destruction. And I think we can all recognize that. I think we all get that. Our tendency that we all have to look for satisfaction and comfort and fulfillment in all the wrong places. You see, the human disposition post-Eden is not atheism. It's idolatry. We're all idolatrous. We look to things, for example, having the latest thing, the best phone, the best car, the best clothes, whatever it might be. Our economy in the West is built on people spending money on things that they don't actually need. Marketers and advertisers play on the restlessness, the innate restlessness of the human heart. The reality that that's what we're like. That's what fuels marketing. It's what fuels advertising, to stoke that desire, to make us discontented with our life as it is and say, you need this or you need that. Or it might be experiences. You need to have this experience or these kinds of experiences. You need to go on this kind of holiday or have this kind of leisure experience, do this leisure activity. And by the way, in our day, we have more opportunities than ever before in front of us for all kinds of experiences, all kinds of things that we can do. And we have social media to stoke up our envy and our dissatisfaction with life, desperately desiring to have a life like that person or what we perceive their life to be like. Having the things that they have, having the experiences they have, having the lifestyle that they have. Does any of it actually satisfy? Does any of it bring lasting satisfaction? Some things might bring fleeting satisfaction, but it never lasts because we're always on to the next thing. Like you have this great holiday, and I love holidays. But you have this great holiday you've paid thousands of pounds for, and you've been looking forward to this for months. It's been the light on your horizon, and you're kind of on your knees crawling over the line to get to this wonderful holiday that's going to be life-changing forever. And then the holiday's over before you know it, and it's back to normal life. We're always looking for the next thing that's on the horizon, and it's kind of like chasing after the wind. And we all do it. It leads to a frazzled life. It leads to a busy life of always seeking more, of always needing more. And actually, ironically, the more we have and the more opportunities we have, the more restless and discontented we become. It's the human problem. Now, the implication of Jesus saying, take my yoke upon you, the implication is that you're already yoked to something else. You're already wearing a yoke and you need a new one. By the way, what is a yoke? Let's just be clear about this. Here's a picture of a yoke. It's this heavy wooden beam that was used by farmers to join two oxen together, a pair of oxen, so they could pull a plow or they could pull a cart together. And the implication of what Jesus is saying is that you're already wearing a yoke. You already have that burden on your neck and you're yoked to something else. You're always yoked to something, joined with something, and you are yoked to something else that you are relying on to pull the cart of your own life. What is the thing that you really, really live for? What are you relying on to deal with your restlessness, the thing that you have yoked yourself to? So it might be that you have yoked yourself to materialism, to having the best stuff, like I was saying before. Or it might be that you've yoked yourself to having experiences. That's what you really live for. That's what you're relying on to find your meaning in life, to satisfy your desires. But ultimately, actually it crushes you, it disappoints you, it destroys you, because there is no earthly experience that can do that can satisfy an eternal and infinite desire. Maybe you're yoked to your family. Trying to live life through your family, or maybe this ideal of having the perfect family. Listen, it's not going to happen. Maybe you're yoked to approval, the approval of others. Again, the irony is it will destroy what you most crave. Because if you're seeking approval, you're seeking relationship, but you will have weak relationships. Because if you're seeking approval all the time, if that's your reason for being is the people's approval, you won't be able to give criticism and you won't be able to take criticism. And strong relationships depend on being able to give and take criticism. It will destroy the very thing you're looking for. Maybe you're yoked to success, having success. So when I was the youth pastor here a few years ago, I came into the youth work. I had a vision of what I wanted the youth work to look like, lots of different things. And part of that was a Friday night. Friday nights, I wanted to have an event that drew lots of young people from outside the church. And that started to happen. So the numbers grew and grew. Young people in the church were bringing friends, and their friends were also bringing their friends. So I experienced a measure of success. And actually, success I found was very important to me. I wanted to be successful, and who doesn't want to be successful? But I liked the feeling of being successful. What happened then is that a couple of other youth leaders from other churches asked to come along and see what we were doing. So what I found is that my success brought me a sense of authority. I know what I'm doing. I can teach other people about this. I have an authority on this. Then that brought me a sense of security. I'm doing really well. Hey, I must be good at this. I'm all things are good at the moment. And all of that fed into my identity. I was finding my identity in what I did. In being a successful youth pastor with the admiration of others. And of course, that's all very well while the numbers are still growing. But then what happens when you have an evening and half the number turn up for whatever reason? It doesn't just disappoint you, it crushes you. Because your identity takes a hit. The thing that you've been building your identity on, in my case, success, takes a big hit. And it has a disproportionate effect on how you see yourself. I wonder what you would put there in place of success. Maybe for you it is success. Maybe that completely resonates with you. You can see that in whatever sphere of work you're in. Maybe it's popularity. Particularly if you're younger. Popularity. Needing that sense of authority among your group of friends and security and having a good group of friends. Inevitably, by the way, if you have popularity as your starting point, if that's number one in your life, that's the king, you will compromise in some way. You will have to compromise. So I found when I was younger, I had to be the one that pushed the joke a bit further than everyone else, to be the funny one that people look to as you will compromise. But then you build your identity on having a group of friends. What happens when you have a falling out though? Maybe it's wealth, financial success. Maybe it's your spouse or finding the perfect spouse. Whatever you are yoked to, the thing that you really live for, ultimately will destroy you. It's like being yoked to a horse that is much bigger and faster and stronger than you. It will kill you because you can't possibly keep up with it. You can't keep up with all the demands of that animal. You've yoked yourself to an animal that you can't possibly control. What are you yoked to? Contrast this with the example of Jesus. Jesus was utterly secure in his identity, his mission, his purpose. So just think about when Jesus was baptized. Jesus, at his baptism, had the Holy Spirit resting on him, the voice of God the Father audibly speaking from heaven. This is my son. I love him. I'm so pleased with him. Talk about being sure of your identity. Jesus was absolutely clear about his identity. What did that do? It gave him security to go into the wilderness immediately for 40 days without food. And it gave him authority over the devil who tried to tempt him during that time. And ultimately, it gave him success in his mission, in his ministry. It's all based on being secure in your identity first. We have it the wrong way around when we start with anything other than our identity in Christ. When we start with whatever it is at the bottom of that circle for you, we have it completely the wrong way around. People talk a lot about boosting your self-esteem. You need to boost your self-esteem. Well, I'm not sure I agree. I think you need to boost your Christ esteem, because that was what will boost your self-esteem. Your Christ esteem, your identity is based on what he says about you, not on what you say about yourself. And when we yoke to anything other than him, anything other than Jesus, it destroys us. It exhausts us. It makes us weary. And you know what? Jesus is not glorified by unhappy, weary, exhausted people. That doesn't glorify him. We are called to be different. We are called to shine with the light of Christ in this dark world around us. So if you're weary and if you're burdened, Jesus says to you, come to me. Come to me. Take that yoke off. Take my yoke upon you instead. It's light, it's easy, it's good. So how do we do that? How do we come to him? How do we find our identity in him? How do we find rest in him? Well, I don't think it's any coincidence that in the very next line, right at the beginning of chapter 12, the subject is the Sabbath. And Jesus starts talking about the Sabbath and tells a couple of stories, answers questions about the Sabbath. And of course, I guess we would primarily understand the Sabbath as a day of rest, a day of rest. Now, it's actually, I'll come to this in a minute, it's a lot more than that, but it's certainly no less than that. Let's start with that, a day of rest. Maybe we think of it as primarily a Jewish thing. You know, from sundown on Friday through to Saturday evening, a whole day to rest every week. And our traditional equivalent would be Sundays, with worship built in, worship of God built in as part of that day. And I guess many of us can remember a time when Sunday really did feel like that, because there was nothing to do. Nothing was open. It was wonderful, actually. I don't think I appreciated it quite as much when I was a child, but I would appreciate it now. But Sabbath, the word Sabbath comes from the Hebrew word Shabbat, which means to stop. To stop. A day. A whole day to stop. To stop working. To stop wanting and envying. A day to stop worrying about things. Maybe a day to turn off your phone. The master of your life. The tyranny of your phone. Maybe a day to turn off the notifications of your work emails and just decide, I'm not checking those emails. A day to direct your focus to God, to delight in him. A day to enjoy a bit of space in your life. A day to enjoy relationships. A day to enjoy food. A day to stop. Or a day to be still and know that I am God, as the psalmist says. Most of us don't rest until we absolutely have to. It's like when your mobile phone is on 5% and you kind of got to plug it in quickly to give it a quick boost before it dies. I think some of us approach rest in that way. I just need to grab something before I die of exhaustion. And most of us confuse rest with distraction and entertainment. Now, distraction and entertainment have their place. Sometimes you just need something to help you switch off. But it's so much more than that. It's nowhere near the complete picture of rest. Rest is actually an active thing as well, an active doing of certain things. And I don't think we're very good at it. I don't think we're very good at Sabbath. I don't think we're very good at stopping. But really, it should be a non-negotiable in our life, because Sabbath is a rhythm that has been woven into creation by God. He rests on the seventh day. God didn't need to rest. He doesn't get weary, but he did. He set an example for us, and he wove this pattern of Sabbath rest into creation. And so for me, it's Friday, because today is not a Sabbath for me. But Friday is my day off. And I have learned, and I've been learning, to guard it and to treasure it and to plan restful activities, to plan it, to be intentional about how I rest and how I replenish. I haven't always done that. I haven't always been so good at guarding my day off. But I know that when I've had a good day off, when I've had a good Sabbath, and I have really genuinely been able to stop, rest, switch off, it replenishes me. It renews me. And why wouldn't it? It's how God designed things. Why wouldn't it have that effect if that's what God says it's going to do? The ironic thing, of course, is that this week, as I've been preparing to preach on this subject of rest, my time in terms of being able to prepare for this has been quite limited because of other things I've been doing. And the thought actually crossed my mind, the temptation crossed my mind, I could just work on it on Friday. I had to rebuke myself immediately as a hypocrite. No, don't do that. You need to guard your day off. It's important. And actually, it's important because ultimately rest is a form of faith. It's a form of putting your trust in God for his provision, for his care. It's recognizing that actually the world does keep turning when I stop, because I'm not in control. I'm not sovereign. God is sovereign. He's in control. And you know, the reason that some of us find it difficult to stop There are lots of reasons for it, but it's often not because often not because we have too much to do. It's out of a sense of anxiety or a lack of faith or a lack of trust in God, or maybe even our own ego, the arrogance of thinking that everything depends on me. I can't stop. I can't take a day off. It'll all fall apart. Forgetting, of course, that you spend a third of your life asleep. And when you're asleep, you're utterly at the mercy of God. You're powerless. You're reliant on God to keep you alive when you're asleep. How can we be that arrogant that we think so much depends on us? Let's not overestimate our own importance. But if we're not stopping, if we're not taking that Sabbath rest, then we ignore the wisdom of God and we become weary, we become burdened, we become stressed. And we live in a modern world, a modern society that is not conducive to rest. It's a 24/7 world. In other words, Sabbath is not just going to happen to you. It's not going to come to you. You have to go after it. You have to be intentional. You have to plan it. Make sure you take a day to stop, to rest, to slow down, to delight. To delight in Jesus, in what you have in your life. To take Jesus' yoke upon you and know that he's the Savior and you are not. He's the righteousness and wisdom of God. You are not. You can rest in his salvation, knowing that he has lived the perfect life on your behalf, so you don't have to prove yourself to anyone. And he's died the death that you should have died, so you don't need to punish yourself. Take time to stop, delight in him and what he's given you. Now, actually, as I said before, Sabbath is a lot more than just a day. It's certainly not less, but it is an awful lot more. Because ultimately, Sabbath is an attitude of heart. To have a Sabbath heart, it's a way of being. It's having a spirit of restfulness that goes through your whole life. And it comes as a result of living in God's presence through the whole week, not just one day. Of being aware of God's goodness and love and peace and presence at all times in all circumstances. So I got this table from a church leader called John Mark Comer, and it compares a life of restfulness, a Sabbath life, with a life of restlessness. And just have a think through some of these. So a life of restfulness, you have margin in your life, meaning you do have time to stop. You build it in. You have time to be present to the moment rather than relentless busyness. No time to stop, driven by the tyranny of the urgent. In a life of restlessness, you sometimes will experience slowness rather than constant hurry, or quiet rather than constant noise. You will have deep relationships with friends, family, community, rather than isolation. In a restful life, you will find that actually increasingly you're able to have time alone, even if you're an extrovert. Time alone, and time alone with God, and really quite enjoy it, rather than constantly being in crowds. Your life is a life of delight rather than distraction. You know, being on your phone and missing a beautiful moment with your kids, or a beautiful moment in creation, or with your friends. It's a life of enjoyment rather than envy. Envy steals enjoyment from us. It's a life of clarity in terms of who you are, your identity, your calling, what you're made to do, rather than living in confusion and disorientation. It's a life of gratitude rather than greed, a life of contentment. Contentment with life in all circumstances, rather than the discontentment of constantly needing and wanting more, or wanting a different life. It's a life of trust, trusting in God rather than anxiety. It's a life of working from a place of love and approval, your identity being based on who you are loved by, not on what you do, which would be working for love and approval. And it's work as contribution. You see, whatever you do in life, whether it's paid or unpaid, you are playing your part in God's big story. And I'm just happy to play whatever part he calls me to play, rather than seeing work as accumulation and accomplishment. I wonder which list resonates more with you. I would guess for the majority, it's probably more like the restless list. And that for you, rest is something you kind of fantasize about. If I could just have that kind of holiday or that kind of experience, you might even achieve it. But then, as I said before, you go back to normal life and all the stress of it. I think that we are truly restful. I think that the sign of having a Sabbath heart is when we find that ordinary life is enough. When you're not always reaching and grasping and wishing for more. when you're aware of and grateful for the goodness and faithfulness of God in your actual life today, rather than an idealized life of tomorrow. As the Apostle Paul says in Philippians 4, I have learnt the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. And do you know what? Rest, contentment in your life is a great weapon against the enemy. It's far more difficult to tempt people who are contented and rested in their life. It's far easier to tempt people who are stressed and weary and unhappy and wanting more and wanting a different life. You are a target for temptation. So Sabbath is not only a command of God, and it is a command, but it's also an invitation from God. And it's an invitation to flourish and thrive. And it is an invitation, not like the oxen who have no choice to be yoked together with this heavy wooden beam. They don't have any choice but to bear that burden and to pull that cart. Jesus gives you a choice. He gives you a choice to be released from the heavy burden of that yoke and to take his yoke upon you, his burden, which is light. It's an invitation to lay your burden down, to detach yourself from what you have been yoked to take Jesus' yoke upon you, and to be yoked only to him, because his is the only yoke that is light. He is the only one who, if you get into harness with him, will not relentlessly and unforgivingly drive you into the ground, because he is gentle and he is humble in heart. He doesn't make unreasonable demands. He guides you. He doesn't drive you. He leads you. He doesn't stand over you like a policeman or an angry school teacher. He died for you. He loves you. He wants the best for you. And he knows what is best. Get into harness with Jesus and only him. Final thing I want to say, and this is really about teeing up the rest of this series as we go on in these next few weeks, is that you can't do verse 28 without verse 29. So verse 28 talks about coming to Jesus and finding rest. And I think we all love the sound of that. Yeah, give me some of that. Yeah, come to Jesus. Give me rest, Jesus. Fantastic. But then verse 29 says how you do that. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. We have to do something. We have to learn from him. This is discipleship that he's talking about. Actively following Jesus is essential. Every day, every hour, looking only to him, listening to him, letting him teach you, following his lead, bringing everything in your life in line with him. That is where you will find rest. Rhythms of rest in our lives are essential, but other rhythms of discipleship are also essential in developing a Sabbath heart. Otherwise, you're just a consumer. You're just a consumer coming on Sundays to get your bit of Jesus for the week, then going off and putting your old yoke back on for the rest of the week and wondering why the Christian life doesn't work for you. No, the life of following Christ is all in. It's all in. Nothing held back. It's a lifelong, day-by-day discipleship. It's about denying yourself, picking up your cross, following him. And so for the rest of this series, we're going to be focusing in on the rhythms of discipleship that we teach on chapter 1. The rhythms of scripture and prayer and generosity and power and freedom, worship, reaching out. And then we'll be finishing the series by looking at the importance of doing all of those things in community, together, in the church. Now, please understand this and hear this. These rhythms are not yet more items to add to your to-do list and increase the burden on you. And if that's what it feels like, then I'd suggest that these are probably things that need to displace other activities in your life. If it's that thing of, I've got to read the Bible as well. I don't have time. I've got to pray. What do you ask me to do now? You've got to do this and I've got to do that. If that's what it feels like, I'd suggest that what you're doing is you're trying to take Jesus' yoke upon you without removing the other yoke first. And of course that will increase the burden on you. That's not what he's asking us to do. These rhythms are not items to add to your to-do list. They are ways of life. They don't increase the burden because they're actually part of following Jesus. His burden is light. So think about what things in your life do you currently do? What takes your energy? Things that don't actually bear fruit in your life. And displace those things by developing these rhythms that we're going to be looking at in your life. So instead of checking Facebook every 5 or 10 minutes, pray every 5 or 10 minutes. Because you will find life and you will find rest in these rhythms. You will find both breathing in and breathing out in these rhythms. You walk alongside and at the same pace as Jesus in these rhythms. Eugene Peterson, in his Message translation of the Bible, he translates verse 29 like this. He says, Jesus says, walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. That's beautiful. That's what they are. These are unforced rhythms of grace when we get this right. And I was struck by a comment that somebody made in our Bible in 1 Year group. That many of us have been following the Bible in a year. And she said this, I'm really thankful to be reading the Bible regularly and consistently again. And it had been ages since I had. And then she said this, it's like sunlight and rain on tired, dry soil. Sunlight and rain on tired, dry soil. It's a great picture of what following Jesus is like and of what these rhythms encourage. Church, we are called to be different. We're called to be different from the rest of the world. We're called to shine with the light of Christ. What would it look like if we were truly, genuinely a community of rest and of gratitude, of peace, of joy, of prayer, of loving one another? What a gift that would be to our town. What a gift that would be to those people on our blessed list. What an opportunity we have to show people the beauty of a life of following Christ, the freedom he brings, the life he brings, the rest he brings, the joy and peace that he brings in our lives. What an opportunity to show there is an alternative to the empty promises of the world. There is an alternative to the busyness and the hurry of the world, the constant striving of the world. What an opportunity we have to love people by how we live, to surround and saturate this town with the love of Jesus. So let me just ask you these questions to finish. Is your life restful or is it restless? Have you come to Christ? Have you ever come to Christ? Are you learning from him, following him? What are you yoked to? What is it that you really live for? Jesus offers rest for your soul. Rest for your soul. So let's grab what he offers with both hands and live a life of rest, a life of fruitfulness, and a life that shines with the light of Christ into this dark world around us. Amen. Amen.